that sometimes, and I really believe this, the problem with our community is that nobody fears us. Nobody fears us.
Oh, wow.
Right? Think
Wow.
about other
That's deep.
groups.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my
So I'm
God.
committed. Yeah.
You just dropped the mega mic just now. Yes. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Heyman Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Mayoka from UdoU. Hola, mi gente. Welcome to this episode of I Have Something to Say, and I'm very excited because I have as our guest Gigi Pedraza, the Chief Executive Director of the Latino Community Fund based out of Georgia. I've been following Gigi for like 2.5 years since the pandemic happened, and we were all like living on LinkedIn basically, right, for the most part. And I gotta say, I'm a fan, Gigi. I just admire your work. Welcome, and thank you for making time to meet with us and have this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy, excited to be here.
Yes, me too. And your organization, the Latino Community Fund, it's a nonprofit, right? But your mission is so important, especially the recent results of the Georgia elections, right? I know that you are hyper focused on protecting democracy, on building community, on finding resources, not in just the form of information, but also the mula, ¿verdad? El bacalao that we need in our communities to really build from a social mobility standpoint our communities, and that you've been steadfast in just showing up in full force to advocate for the Latino community specifically, because we're very like unseen, right? Although we're kind of here and in growth mode. Although we've always been in growth mode, but in like these quantum leaps, right, that we're experiencing, I want to say, in the last 10 years. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. The reason why we, really spearhead the Latino Community Fund, because quite frankly, was out of anger at not seeing ourselves necessarily represented, not seeing really the power that we knew existed, and everybody talks about building power. To get to build power, people have to recognize they have power, and you have to have some type of capacity to be able to survive, right? And once you feel that you have your feet firm on the ground, then you recognize that you belong in a place, and that's how we understand this power building idea. And so yeah, I mean, we are a nonprofit. We have both a sort of direct service focus, but also a organization to organization focus. We believe in a collective impact model, and the only way that we can move forward is if we support organizations that are already on the ground. And when I say organizations, not necessarily nonprofits, can be community groups, can be neighbors that come together, that are already doing the work in partnership with our families, with workers, with entrepreneurs. And so it is very much both at the grassroots, but also at the capacity building sort of organization to organization level. We have a peer support network of all Latinx, Latino, Latina leaders in Georgia, and it's an exciting time to be able to do what I get to do. It's not easy, but I enjoy it every day, and I'm really inspired by seeing people like you said showing up every day. And I know that these days Georgia is very sexy because of the elections that we have. But we've been here, right, for decades. Hello.
Yes.
I remember, tell me one time I went to a conference in San Francisco about Latino leaders, and it was my first conference, I think, maybe my second conference. This is 2018, early, and people asked me where I was coming from, and I said Georgia, and they said the country.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a interesting moment because I said, of course, my Slavic accent gives me away. Uh, but the fact that our fellow leaders, right, just a few hours away, thought it was more likely to have a Latino leader in the room talking about philanthropy, talking about investments, talking about movement building. It was more likely to have someone from Georgia, the country, than from Georgia, the state. Made me
Yes.
realize this is why I need to be in the room to remind people, right, that we are here
Yes.
and we have always been doing the work.
Yes, exactly. And I know the "Estamos aquí," right? It's kind of like a big banner statement.
Mhm.
And we experience the same thing in here in Florida, right? We're under the microscope. And many times, I don't know if you experience the same thing over there. Sometimes I sit on these boards, committees, and I'm baffled at how a lot of these grants, are formulated based on a lot of assumptions about what our community needs, instead of just going into the community and asking whoever walks out of a bodega, right? Say, whichever person, say, ¿qué tú necesitas? What are the biggest issues that are affecting
Yeah.
your community? And they'll tell you. And if you ask that same person, do you have any ideas on how these things can be solved? They'll tell you too. And so is that something that you experience on the ground in Georgia as well? Like this complete disconnect from the sources of funding with the very community that they're trying to support?
Yes, and since we are talking about the election, I'll tell you that before the general election, the one on November 8th, not the runoffs, it's on a
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday. I get a call from a funder. I get a text on my phone Sunday at 5 p.m. asking me if I need money for field work,
Mm-hmm.
and I said we've known for 2 years the day of the election. It's Tuesday. It starts at 7 in the morning.
Yeah.
We don't need money for fieldwork because everything that we had planned is already planned and funded
Yeah.
at the moment. I could take the money for self-care though, because our canvassers, our members, people are exhausted. We have had
Yeah.
election after runoff, after lawsuit, after law change for the past, I forget how many years. So they
Mm-hmm.
said, oh, no, 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 we only want to fund people knocking on doors. And so folks forget that civic participation is a year-long affair, and it's every year. And it doesn't
Yes.
matter who wins, the work continues because people in elected positions or appointed positions work for us. And it's our
Yes.
job to keep them accountable, right? And so part of a lot of the work that we do, particularly with youth, is we take them to the Capitol. We say, this is the people's house, right?
Yes.
You can get in, even if you have a Mexican inspired passport, it doesn't matter because
Mm-hmm.
representatives, senators represent you regardless if you voted for them. If you voted, right? If you're a citizen or
Yes.
not, they still work for you. So, and I think with philanthropy, the challenge is that it's connected to some, KPI, some numbers that I understand why, but they are just a slice of the entire work that needs to happen in
Yes.
community and the trust that we need to build because people need to understand that we care about their lives, not just about their votes, right? And this is why
Correct.
people turn out because they recognize, oh, look, when I needed financial assistance, when I had a problem, right? I learned about my rights. When I needed, to identify a clinic, when, I had a domestic violence issue, when my
Mm-hmm.
child was struggling in school because he was being discriminated because he speaks Spanish, these people have been there. My community is there. And so
Yes.
when we come and say, listen, this is an important election. These are the platforms. Please vote for whatever you think is going to advance, the opportunities for your family, for your community. People make the connection of policy, of voting, and between their daily lives. And that is
Right.
something that's really hard to see for people that are just sitting there, writing checks from a desk because they are not
Yes.
community.
Exactly, exactly. And so then, all it takes is investing time, right? And a little bit of curiosity, if you will, right?
That's my thing.
It's
Curiosity. Ask.
Yes, it's
Ask
just
us.
open. Just go out and meet with the people, right? That you're trying to support. And so I think that gap can only be bridged by voices like yours, right? By you exercising constantly throughout the year, like we try to do here too, right? That advocacy muscle that's so important to be able to model the behavior that then will convene people, and say, oh, okay, I see, this is how it's done. This is the information that I need to also arm myself, right, with the data that they need, right, to then be interested. And then I can pack in, right, the stories of impact, the other layers, like you mentioned, the self-care, right? Like, give them the numbers first and what they need, right, to then be able to uh, create other interventions that are really needed to alleviate the burdens, right, of showing up too. Because our community, we're working 2 3 jobs. We're really pouring ourselves into our children, especially people that haven't been here for a long time, or that can't transfer their credentials from their country of origin, right, here to exercise, being a teacher or being a lawyer, being an accountant, or being whatever it is, right? That, or even an entrepreneur. It takes time while, people gather all the proper requirements. And so in that, we get lost on that survival mode that you were talking about at the beginning, right? Of just trying to breathe before I can even engage. And so you're at that intersection then, right? Of providing the resources, supporting, and creating this familia, really, this sense of familia, and that we're here, right? There's people that came before you, right? You're here now, and you're struggling, but it's gonna be okay. You'll see. You'll be able, in 2 years, you'll look back and you'll say, "Wow, que chévere," right? Everything's okay, and you're gonna be an active participant once we stop the hemorrhaging, right? But then it also, have you seen in your years working on the ground like this, how these very people and families then become leaders themselves in the community and pay it forward when with
Yes,
other.
yeah, and I think that's one of the most, really motivating and inspiring pieces of this work. So, I mean, I only step into a leadership role, like I shared at the beginning, out of anger, 5 6 years ago. Before then, I volunteered. I mean, I knock on doors for the 2010 census. Um, I'm an immigrant myself. I have two daughters that, I had to go to school and fight to so that they could remain in their gifted classes, because without explanation, they were kicked out. The only
Mhm.
Latina in the entire class. I was chosen to be kicked out because who knows? There was no explanation. The class was full. And so I have lived some of it myself, which is
Mhm.
why I can connect with, anger is mobilizing an active emotion, but also being able to see sort of the evolution of folks.
Mhm.
And so, the story, for example, of our civic participation manager, Michelle Zuluaga, she comes from a family. She was born here in the US, but is the only person in her family that was born here. Her family was deported when she
Mm.
was 10 years old. And then her whole family, they went to Colombia. They split. She was never able to live with her family again, because that's what deportation does to families. They separate families not only at the border, but anywhere it happens. And so then when she finished high school, people put together money, and she was sent here and said, you have the golden ticket, make it work for all of us. So instead of taking 4 years for her career, for her to finish her degree, it took her 7 years, because she had to work, right, all the time. It took her
Right.
7 years. And I met her when she was volunteering. Just she wanted to help the community. So she was knocking on doors for political campaigns. Eventually, she became a volunteer for us. Then we hired her as a coordinator, and she then built our Latinos for Democracy program, where the Estamos Aquí hashtag comes from us to 4 organizations to now 11 organizations across the state, not only knocking doors, but develop messaging, telling us what works best, so that you have an organization, for example, in Northeast Georgia, undocumented led, standing at the busiest intersections with tamales and atole the day of the election, saying, "Don't forget about me, I'm here." Right? I cannot
Right.
vote, but you can. So I'm here to remind you that I'm also here, and the policies affect me, but I cannot affect the outcome of the election. Um, And on the other side of the state, you have the Coalition of Latino Leaders, who's actually renting school buses and getting everyone in the bus to vote together so that we make a show of force. So, you have different strategies, but Michelle understands it. And she has gone from, someone that, got here with $500, not knowing where to go without no family, to run the largest election protection program in the largest coalition of Latino-led organizations working on civic education and mobilization. So that's one story of many that I see every day, right? And that's why the work matters, and that's why it's so
Yes.
fulfilling. Yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness. This is just wonderful, right? Because this is what a collaborative model then looks like, right? Can you talk a little bit more about your experience? Because we work in a very collaborative way too here locally with the nonprofit that we launched a few years ago, and it just works. It's more organic. I think when you lean in on each other and are able to figure out the strengths of each group, right? And then the weak, let's call it weaknesses or opportunities, right, of each group of learning. That's where the magic happened. Talk to me about how that weaving happens in Georgia.
So let me start by saying it's not easy, right?
Hmm.
it
No.
is it is organizing at the end, and organizing takes work.
Yeah.
So we do have a network of 39 member organizations. They are all Latinx-led across the state. They are very different. Some of them do, cultural work, for example, only. Some of them do advocacy work only. And so
Hmm.
in between, you have your entire sort of, organization groups that do direct services. Some do civic participation, some do federal enrollment. And so, we started building, of course, trust. That's the base of it. And then in
Hmm.
2020, what happened was that, when COVID hit, we saw our role as, and we have seen our roles at the beginning as sort of a quarterback for smaller community groups, right? How do we support them better? And so we said, we're going to raise money. Who of you all can commit to continue serving the community, even though we're being told to, shut ourselves behind? People are still going to be working. So who of you can commit to continue serving the community? So a few people, organizations raised their hands. And so what we did is that in 24 hours, collectively, we came up with a list of priorities. How do we prioritize? Who do we want to serve? Because money is never going to be enough. And so we came up with
Yes.
this list of 5 bullet points that are, these are the priorities. People with diversity and documentation status, right? Undocumented,
Hmm.
underdocumented folks. People with limited mobility because they cannot afford a car, or they are banned from driving, or they have mobility issues. People with
Hmm.
dependents, right? Dependents. And people that are English learners. And then people that are in frontline occupations. So we came up with this together on a huddle over
Uh-huh.
Zoom in like 4 hours. And then we put it out there. We said, we are prioritizing this, and then who buys in. We started with 4. 2 weeks later, we had 21 organizations saying yes. And
Wow.
so this is how we went from a $250,000 fund to a $3 million fund,
Yes.
dispersed across the state. And I think that the sheer amount of people we were able to serve as a network was
Hmm.
instrumental in all of these organizations and leaders recognizing how much we could do when we work together. And so the next
Absolutely.
step, right, was let's add vaccines and tests. So we did that. And then we realized how much we knew, how much we had learned. And so the latest iteration of this collective model sort of work was this year. What we did is, instead of membership meetings where we usually have and talk and connect with each other, we had peer support, sort of mentorship cohorts. We did a survey. What
Hmm.
is it that we need to learn the most? And what is the talent that we have already in our network? So we had these 2 large cohorts of leaders learning from each other, one in advocacy and policy, because the silver lining, although I hate that to say that, but I guess something that happened during COVID was that direct service organizations recognize the impact of policies in their work, right? We have never
Correct.
been
Yes.
able to program, right, a community out of poverty, but then you, when you
Yes.
recognize the policies, you know why you have to do this work. So we have an advocacy and policy cohort with 17 organizations. learning from each other, led by two leaders of our groups. And then we have a government grants and compliance, because the amount of dollars available from the government is huge. And that's a way
Mhm.
to build our landscape, our infrastructure in Georgia, right? And it's our money. We deserve to get it.
Yes.
We have another cohort of that, and so we have been learning together. And these little gold nuggets that come out when people realize, I had no idea this position made these decisions that has been affecting my community. And we already see organizations, for example, developing know your rights trainings in schools, because they recognize that that's what's missing from their community experience. They connected that with the
Mhm.
laws, the policies that exist. They learn from best practices, and all of this happens within our network. So
Yeah.
that's a way to share how this collective impact, right? You have to let go, because you cannot
Yeah.
tell exactly people what they need, but you have to be available. And this is also a frame, right, of restorative justice. We have
Yeah.
high expectations for our members and for our leaders to show up and show out for community, but we provide higher levels of support too, so that nobody
Yes.
can say, I didn't know, when we say, why aren't you doing this? So
Right,
yeah.
right, right. And that's fantastic. And that's where the capacity building comes in, right? And so then people are able to, again, lean into each other, learn, and really better understand the minutia, right? The
Mhm.
minutia of how things work, and connect those dots, right?
Yeah.
And it's a continuous learning experience. I can speak for myself,
Yeah, but I think
in
also learning that we are there for each other. So we have,
yes.
right? I learn every day from our members. I was actually calling someone last week and say, how do you do this? Because
Yeah.
I was struggling. I
Yes.
had somebody else that said, oh, we have had a threat. I know you guys have had this before. So the fact that we can call each other, ask for help, and know that we're going to be there for each other also helps with what you mentioned, the burden of doing this work, because there's real harm that some of our
Yes.
folks have experienced, right? We are in a lawsuit. We have to, under huge scrutiny. It
Mhm.
dawns, it's heavy every
Mhm.
day on us. We have folks that have been threatened, in their personal lives. We have folks that have burned out and had to leave the space, and they still care. They can no longer take the pain. When we
Yeah.
negotiate advocacy or positions or bills, there's always people that are being left behind, right? Sometimes we need to
Yeah.
make decisions, and it always means, compromise only means there's people left behind. So
Yeah.
recognizing that we are saying no to some of those folks, I mean, it's heavy, it's really hard work.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's tough. And speaking about Latino civic engagement and about the numbers, right? Let's talk about Georgia, because I know that there's not much talk about the Latino voting bloc, and I really wanted to have this conversation with you because you mobilize people, you really do, and also I know that I want to learn about the behind the scenes from a Latino lens during this past election and the runoff, the recent runoff that was won by the Democratic candidate. I know that the numbers from Pew Research that I was looking at most recently says that 34.5 million Hispanic Americans are eligible to vote, were eligible to vote this year. That's 1/10 of the population. That's crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The numbers are so large, and that in the last 4 years, since 2018, uh, Latinos represented 62% of the total growth of US eligible voters during 4 years, and that's almost 5 million new eligible voters, right? So what does that look like on the ground? Because one thing is that they're eligible, Another thing is getting them registered, getting them educated, and encouraging them to learn about the candidates, right? With their platforms, how again that connects to your day to day, right? Issues, and then turn out to vote, and then also with all the coverage, especially during the runoff. I can only imagine it must have been crazy on the ground. How did you, right, and the organization, the Latino Community Fund, show up to ensure that again we're seen?
Yes. So in Georgia, we are over 300,000 registered Latino voters. Again, a huge growth since 2016. We're around 5-6% of the electorate in Georgia. But let me share a caveat. Some researchers estimate that around up to 70% of Latinos are not represented in those numbers because the numbers get updated at the county level. And in Georgia,
Mm,
we have 159 counties. Imagine how hard it is to organize. So
yeah.
a mistake is made. I'll give you an example. My husband's Puerto Rican. He's not Black. However, they updated the roles and he shows up as Black. He's tried to
Mm.
change that and still is not changing. So he's not reflected in the turnout numbers. However, he votes in every election. So we estimate that there is a lot more Latinos voting in Georgia than those numbers. The turnout has been growing exponentially, and that is because significant part of the growth in Georgia comes from kids turning 18. And we know that
Mm.
in our community in Georgia, 90% of those children turning 18 or children under 18 are American citizens. So when you think
Right.
about naturalization, unnecessary, right? And these are
Yeah.
children that, like my daughters, many of them have lived in their own bodies and minds. What is it to be subject of the impact of those bills, those laws, without having the opportunity to participate in who gets elected? And so people are fired up. We know, for example, that 34% of all the Latinos that turned out early in the runoff had not voted in the 2018 gubernatorial election.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's huge,
That
34%.
is. That's
So this is a
awesome.
new block of voters. We also know that, and sometimes when you look at the numbers, they look relatively small. They look like 2% of Latino voters participated. But because folks are not from that community, folks that put out those numbers, I can tell you that then when you break them down, then you see the difference because, there's different density in different counties. So some of the counties, for example, that we work with, providing health services, providing know your rights, providing financial assistance. I'll give you an example. DeKalb County, that county, 16% of the entire Latino electorate turn out early. Those are huge
Mm.
numbers. And it's a big
Yeah.
difference from this 2% number that you hear. When 16% are so committed that turn out early, right? We know we're doing something right. So
Right.
it's really, numbers are interesting because they need context to be able to be understood.
Yes.
Um, but to answer your question about how did it look like, it looked like crazy. Because we're all, we're a small team, but we work with volunteers and with our member organizations. So one is that in 4 weeks, remember SB 202 cut short to half the period to organize after a runoff. So
Yes.
instead of having 8-10 weeks to plan, we had 4, and one of them was Thanksgiving week.
Yeah.
So we really had 3 weeks to raise money, distribute money to the folks who are doing additional field work, getting shifts for door knocking, getting shifts for phone banking numbers. In 3 weeks, we touched 93,000 Latino voters in three
Wow.
weeks,
Wow.
which is huge for us. We almost
That
got it.
is. Yes. That's a lot. Yes. That's
And
huge.
so we were in the office, and we couldn't really have staff meetings because we were all on the phones. We were calling. People was on the street. We were, some of our members were at the polling locations, interpreting the polling locations that we knew people had been harassed or just, really felt uncomfortable to be able to share
Yes.
their voice, particularly in coastal Georgia and in Northwest Georgia. And then we had all the media show. And so one of the things that we did was that there are these places where, when we are nonpartisan, of course, and at the same time we support policies that accelerate positive opportunities and positive, right, support for our community. So anything that's about expanding access to healthcare, for example, we will support. Anything that we will expand access to education, in-state tuition access, we will support. So
Mm-hmm.
we decided we are going to go and show up. It's one of those places where established progressives go and show up, and it's mostly white, a white place in Metro Atlanta. So we connected with a CNN and Espanol crew, and we just showed up. So you have this place where it's literally 99% white, and you have this massive table of people speaking in Spanish with CNN Espanol recording live in Spanish, because we made sure to
Mm-hmm.
get the table in the middle where everybody could
Mm-hmm.
see us.
Yes.
And so that's how we spent the night watching the election. Of course, when you do work in community, you know sort of how the counties are going to go one way or another. So we were very excited to be there, and we were there until like 11, I believe. And then the next day, of course, we already had interviews at 7 in the morning because Televisa was interested, right? Lots of
Yes.
folks from Mexico are really interested in knowing what's happening because half their families are here, right? This is a
Yes.
transnational reality. So,
Yes.
we were there. It was very exciting, but we were so tired, honestly.
I could imagine. And that's where the self-care comes in, right? And that's like that, the humanity aspect of it. That
I know.
while you, and this is why I think a lot of people also shy away from doing this type of work, because it requires uh, time away from your family, a lot of energy, mental and emotional investment, right? And it could be very, very taxing, but it's so necessary. It's so, and I just feel that if more people in the Latino community, more, there's so many leaders in the Latino community, would just show up un poquito, porque if everyone takes un poquito, then it's less taxing on on others,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
it's true. I remember I tried to open my home door with my car keys, and I'm like, why is it not working? Why is it not working? um, but the interesting thing is that people can be leaders. I always say, if you have a brain, you have a body, you're a leader,
Mhm.
right? You're in your
Mhm.
space. But particularly in the civic participation space, you can lead in so many ways, and you don't have to knock on doors, although that's important. You can talk to your friends about it.
Yeah.
You can vote yourself. You can volunteer. You can write a
Mhm.
check, right?
Yes.
Taking care of your neighbor's kids so that your neighbor can actually go to vote or can go volunteer is another way of civic engagement. So there are many
Yes.
ways, and our community is generous, right? How many of us have crashed on a couch when we didn't have a place to go? That is also civic engagement. You're preventing homelessness. Come on, I mean, we need to
Claro.
give also ourselves the credit that we deserve. El primo, el tío, we all have had people crashing
Yes.
with us at one point.
Yes.
We have to give ourselves also the credit, because I think we fail to connect those dots. Is that sometimes, and I really believe this, the problem with our community is that nobody fears us. Nobody fears us,
Mm. Oh, wow.
right? Think
Wow.
about other
That's deep.
groups.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
I'm committed. Yeah.
You just dropped the mega mic just now. Yes. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. That hit me right
Think
there.
if think if someone, right, said something about Latinos, and then they have the same type of fallback that they do
Yes.
when they talk about our communities.
Yes.
We are too nice sometimes. So I'm committed to
Yes.
put a little fire in people's pants in Georgia. I don't care if they are Democrat,
Yes.
Republican, Libertarian.
It
Our
doesn't matter.
votes, yeah, have to be earned every
Mm-hmm.
single year. I don't care when people say, "Oh, Latinos, are a voting bloc that lean this way or another." Guess what? It's
Mm-hmm.
transnational. In Georgia,
Yeah.
yes, we have huge number of kids that are American citizens turning 18. We also have significant Venezuelan immigration. We also have, after Maria, you know, over 80,000 Puerto Ricans moved to Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And so those folks, right, who is going to invest in them? so that they
Mm-hmm.
recognize that this is their place, this is their home. What are the policies that are important to them so that they can turn out and mobilize, right?
Yes,
So,
totally. Totally. And you're describing Central Florida right now. Like what you just described, the
mhm,
Venezuela community, the Puerto Rican community coming after Maria, and all of that is exactly what we're experiencing here. So, to your point, it's happening across the country. It's not, this is not, Georgia's not a unique case, right? What we're saying is that the growth is there. um Latinos are a force to be reckoned with, really. 62 million strong, 20% almost of the population. We're talking about, in the next 10 years, 78% of net new workers, according to the Department of Labor. I mean, don't kill the messenger. This is happening, right? And so we are currently, in the next 10, 15 years, experiencing this demographic shift in this country that everybody, talks about, right? The new global majority, or whatever you want to call it, but it's driven by the Latino population. It really is. And I feel that it's by design, that we're underpaid, overlooked, unseen. Because if we did have fair pay, for example, right? Imagine. I just found out last week that over half of the new homes that were bought during the pandemic were Latino buyers. Imagine, despite all of the barriers to access to loans and all of this. And it's be and I think that there is fear. There is fear, and that's why these things are put into place. But what you're talking about is the fear of the backlash, right?
yeah,
If we
the
Yeah. And
political
so, and
piece.
that's why, yes, and yes, correct. And so that just hit me like a brick on the forehead, because you're absolutely right. You pusiste el dedo en la llaga. You just put the finger in the sore, and it hurts, right? To think that we're too meek. We're way too meek, too nice, too submissive, too whatever you want to call it. And I think that one of the things, I guess, we need to then invest in is in capacity building, from it, learning how to self advocate, right?
Yeah,
Learning how to push back, learning how to show up, learning how to navigate the bullshit, learning all of these things that are critical to be able to take a stance and not be violent or offensive or any of those things. It's just no coño. Just stand up like everybody else does, right? Just and have to create this sense of respeto, respect, because that's a fear is tied to a certain level of, like, oh, wait a second, you
yeah,
know
yeah,
respect, to setting healthy boundaries of engagement with our community, so that way they don't call you 2 days out or a week out from the election. No, they start engaging with you, for example, now,
yeah,
right? The fun.
yeah. And the fear is like these two sides of a coin. So yes, fear that we will take over, and fear that and at the same time, because we're preventing this, right? We're designing this, then they're not going to show up, so we don't have a problem. We can do whatever we want with them. To me, the opportunity too is that Latinos, we are multiracial, right? And multi-ethnic. So, we could be in any room. You don't know who's Latino oftentimes. If you are like me, you look like me, you can't escape it. But sometimes you can. And so we do have a huge opportunity to build coalitions, to build solidarity, because we are, so intertwined with lots of many other communities. And, intersectionality is a real thing. I cannot be me if not being a mom, an immigrant, a wife, a woman, a cisgender woman. You know what I'm saying? So it's
Yeah, yes.
it's really, really interesting. So also, we need to figure out how do we develop a narrative that allows everyone to reimagine a future, to really imagine a future where we're all part of it. Because the
Hmm.
fear is that by stepping up and being more visible, then other people are going to lose. And some of them, yes, they will, but it's all of us together, right? Nobody should be excluded for that present, that future. And that's something I wrestle with every day. How do we articulate that we we just not only want but deserve and need to be part of the decision making process at all levels and sectors in this country, because we are the country, right? Because we
Yeah.
were always here. We were always here. Half the country used to be Mexico. The line crossed us. We didn't cross it, right? The
Right.
first settlement, European settlement in the US, was from Spain. So, how do we articulate that in a way that, does not necessarily exclude people and they see us, that we are
Yes.
America?
Right. Wow. This has been a fantastic conversation. I mean, I want more, obviously, but we don't have all day. I could spend hours, talking with you. And we did get a chance in 2020 to speak briefly when we were supporting the runoff then. I was like, oh my God, we, here locally in Florida, we wanted to support, Georgia in the runoff then. Yes. And I just picked up the phone, and someone told me Gigi Pedraza, and I remember that we had I'm like picking your brain, and I'm like, I just need to know what will resonate, what are the issues, right?
I
We
remember
had
that, yeah, for the
Yes, yes,
messaging
and we had
piece,
that
yeah.
brief conversation, and that is what we need to be doing, right? Supporting each other. And so while we were trying to support you, I wanted to be mindful, right, of the reality in Georgia, because no es lo mismo que el Latino in La Florida. There might be some overlaps and some common threads, right? But the experiences are completely different because it's two different states, right? With two different mindsets and demographics and needs and policies also and all of that. So I want to thank you for being that type of leader. And I already knew from back then, that is just generous and open and accessible and just wanting has you have you I feel like this sense of urgency, right, in the way you speak, because there is a sense of urgency. This, change has to happen pronto, soon, because our community uh, needs to be part, of the equation, not an afterthought, not a sidekick, but actually part of the decision making process as we move forward, right? Do you agree with that? And if there's anything else you'd like to add to, speak directly to Latino leaders out there, not only in the corporate sector and in the community, but I want to talk about business leaders too, because I feel that business leaders like myself have the freedom, right, to show up when we want to show up, how we want to show up. So, what would you say as some parting words?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Our promise to everyone, to the community, to funders, to everyone, is that we want to accelerate positive change, to your point, because we cannot wait for change. People say, oh, demographics eventually. We cannot wait for eventually, because that means every day millions of people's, dreams are being curtailed. People are being told your dreams don't have a place in this country, right? Your aspirations are not worth it. And that is not true. And so, our promise is to accelerate positive change by investing in leaders. People are already doing work in the community. And for the business community, there is a direct correlation between businesses from one's community and civic participation. I don't know if you have seen, right, those findings from research. When people see businesses owned and led by people that look like us, we feel that we belong. We identify the place as our own. And that's a number one stepping stone to then say, when you belong someplace, right, it's yours. You feel you're part of it, you protect it. And we are very protective of our families, of our communities. So businesses have a responsibility to show up, to be visible, and to engage in this civil, in civic discourse, because you're part of the community, especially Latino businesses, like African American, Black businesses. We are the core of our communities. 25% of all of our businesses are family owned,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we serve our own communities. So there is a huge opportunity there for business owners, but also for corporations, where all your clients and workforce, is coming from, you're looking at it.
Mhm.
Bicultural, bilingual, multi-ethnic, multiracial oftentimes. So I just see
And
ourselves,
multi-talented.
and
And
multi-talented.
multi-talented.
I just see ourselves as a huge opportunity. That's it.
Yes,
Yeah. An
absolutely. Well,
untapped opportunity.
an untapped opportunity. Yes, and an underestimated opportunity too. So listen, this has been great, Gigi, mi hermana. My God, I adore you. This was great. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. Cuenta conmigo for anything. If there's any way we could talk offline, right? Any way that I can support you, and our network too. Mi network is tu network. So I'm just delighted to have had this conversation with you, y te lo agradezco. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been
Gracias por
wonderful.
invitarme. Me encantó.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.